Imagine you've been walking for weeks. The food where your family lived is disappearing. The rivers are drying up. The animals you hunted have moved somewhere else. And your tribe has only one choice: keep going. Day after day, you follow the coastline. Sometimes there's enough to eat, sometimes there isn't. Every morning, you wake up hoping the next beach will be better than the last. Then one day, you stop. In front of you is water. Not a river, not a lake, an ocean. The land you've been following for hundreds of miles simply ends. You look across the water, and in the distance, you can just barely make out another piece of land. It's close enough to see, but impossibly far to swim. Behind you is a land that's slowly killing you. Ahead of you is a place you've never been, a place that might have food, might have fresh water, might even be completely empty. There's only one problem: boats don't exist. No sails, no paddles, no maps, no compass. No one has ever taught you how to cross the sea. So, what do you do? For most of us, oceans feel like barriers. We fly over them in a few hours without giving them a second thought. A ferry arrives exactly when it's supposed to. Cargo ships carry almost everything we own across the planet every single day. Water doesn't separate the world anymore, it connects it. But for almost all of human history, standing at the edge of the ocean meant standing at the edge of the unknown. One wrong decision could mean drifting into open water, never finding land again, and disappearing without leaving a single trace, which makes one fact almost impossible to believe. Long before cities, long before farming, long before the wheel, humans somehow reached islands that had never been connected to the mainland, places surrounded by miles of open ocean, not by accident, but on purpose. The question is, how? How did people who had never seen a real boat manage to cross some of the most dangerous water on Earth? The answer begins much earlier than you might think, long before anyone ever built a ship. To answer that question, we have to go back nearly 70,000 years. At the time, the world looked completely different. Huge ice sheets covered much of the northern hemisphere. So much water was locked up in ice that sea levels were more than 300 feet lower than they are today. If you stood on the coast back then, the shoreline wouldn't be where it is now. It would be miles farther away. Entire pieces of land that are underwater today were dry ground. You could walk from Siberia into North America. Britain was still connected to Europe. Indonesia wasn't a chain of islands like it is today. It was one enormous landmass. At first, that sounds like it answers everything. Maybe people just walked. And for many places, they did. But then archaeologists found something that didn't make any sense. Deep in Indonesia lies an island called Flores. Even during the Ice Age, even when sea levels were at their lowest, Flores was never connected to the mainland. No matter how much the ocean shrank, there was always open water between the island and the rest of the world. Not a river, not a narrow stream. Open sea. Yet scientists discovered stone tools there dating back hundreds of thousands of years, long before modern humans even arrived in the region. Which means another human species, probably Homo erectus, somehow reached the island anyway. Think about that for a second. They had no metal, no written language, no engines, no maps, and yet they crossed water that should have stopped them completely. Then the mystery became even bigger, because around 65,000 years ago, modern humans reached Australia. Today, Australia feels isolated. It's surrounded by thousands of miles of ocean. But even during the Ice Age, when the seas were much lower, there was still one problem. You couldn't simply walk there. There were still stretches of open water separating Asia from the giant continent scientists call Sahul, the ancient landmass that joined Australia and New Guinea together. Some crossings may have been only a few miles, others were much longer. Either way, at some point, someone had to leave land behind with nothing but water in front of them. Imagine how terrifying that must have been. You push away from the shore, the waves grow larger. Soon, the beach behind you becomes smaller and smaller until it disappears completely. Now you're surrounded by nothing but water. No landmarks, No guarantee the island you're aiming for is even still in the right direction. If you drift too far, there's no turning back, no rescue, no second chance. And yet, they made it. Not once, but enough times to populate entire continents. So the obvious question is, if boats didn't exist, what exactly were they floating on? The surprising answer is they probably didn't have boats. At least, not the kind you're imagining. Forget wooden ships. Forget carved canoes. Forget sails catching the wind. Those inventions wouldn't appear for tens of thousands of years. The first people to cross the sea almost certainly traveled on something much simpler. Maybe a few logs tied together with vines. Maybe thick bundles of reeds that naturally floated on water. Maybe even fallen bamboo, lashed together just well enough to keep a family above the waves. It wouldn't have looked impressive. It only had to float. That's the important part. Today, we think of boats as machines. Ancient humans probably thought of them as floating ground, just enough to survive the crossing. And here's something fascinating. You don't need advanced engineering to build a raft. Children can stack sticks that float. If you've ever pushed a log into a river, you've already discovered the basic idea. Humans have always been incredible at solving simple problems with whatever nature provides. A sharp stone becomes a knife. An animal hide becomes clothing. A branch becomes a spear. So when they reached the ocean, the question wasn't, how do we invent a boat? It was, how do we stop ourselves from sinking? But there was another problem. Even if your raft floated, how would you know where to go? Out on the open ocean, everything looks the same. No roads, no mountains, no signs, just water stretching in every direction. You can't open a map. You can't check a compass. If the current slowly pushes you off course, you might never realize it. Modern sailors trained for years to navigate the sea. So how did people who had never studied navigation manage it? The answer may have been hiding in the sky. Long before humans understood astronomy, they understood patterns. The sun always rose in roughly the same direction. The stars returned night after night. The waves moved with the wind. Birds flew toward land every evening. Floating branches often drifted from nearby islands. Even clouds could reveal something invisible. Large islands force warm air upward, creating clouds that can sometimes be seen from dozens of miles away. To us, they're just clouds. To someone searching for land, they might have been hope. And they probably didn't travel alone. Imagine 20 or 30 people standing on a beach. They're not sending one brave explorer. They're sending families, parents, children, food, stone tools, fire carried carefully inside a container of ash. This wasn't a desperate swim. It was a planned journey, a decision that everyone believed was worth the risk, because staying where they were could have been even more dangerous than leaving. Think about how much courage that takes. To push away from the only land you've ever known toward a place you've never seen, trusting that somewhere beyond the horizon, another shore exists. And somehow, again and again, they were right. But there's one last mystery. Were these journeys actually planned, or were they accidents? For decades, scientists argued that maybe the first ocean crossings happened by chance. Imagine a powerful storm ripping trees from the shoreline. A small group of people is swept out to sea on a tangled mass of logs and branches. Days later, against impossible odds, they worship on another island. It sounds possible until you look at the evidence. Because finding a new island by accident is one thing. Building a life there is something completely different. Archaeologists haven't found just one person on these distant islands. They found entire communities, stone tools, fireplaces, animal bones, evidence of children growing up there, generation after generation. That means these weren't one-time accidents. People kept arriving, again and again. If the first crossing had been pure luck, repeating it over and over would have been almost impossible, which suggests something extraordinary. They knew what they were doing. Maybe not with maps, maybe not with mathematics, but with knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Someone had crossed before. Someone remembered which season the winds were calm. Someone knew which birds always flew toward land. Someone knew when the tides were strongest. That knowledge became survival, and survival became tradition. It's easy to underestimate ancient humans because their world looked simple. No cities, no roads, no writing. But intelligence doesn't begin with technology. It begins with solving problems. And crossing an ocean with nothing but nature around you may have been one of the greatest problems our species ever solved. In fact, every time humans reached a new island, they changed the history of our species forever. Those journeys spread people across Southeast Asia, into Australia, eventually into the Pacific, and thousands of years later, to nearly every corner of the planet. Every continent you know today, every country, every civilization exists because someone somewhere looked across an unknown horizon and decided to keep going. So the answer is they probably didn't wait for perfect technology. They used simple rafts, carefully watched the sky, the waves, and the birds. They learned from every successful journey. And most importantly, they were willing to risk everything for the possibility of something better on the other side. That's easy to forget today. We cross oceans in hours. We complain when a flight is delayed. But the greatest journeys in human history didn't begin with engines. They began with courage, with curiosity, and with a handful of people standing on a lonely beach, looking toward a horizon no human had ever crossed before. Because long before humans conquered the sea, they first had to conquer something much harder: the fear of the unknown.